Welcome back, my nappy brothers and sisters, to Adibeng, where we address issues pertinent to the development of Africa and its youth. Now, in the previous part of this episode, we talked about the history of the practice known as polygamy, and we highlighted that there are mainly two forms of this practice, right? You have polygyny, right, involving one man and multiple women, and polyandry, right, one woman, multiple men. And we also discussed some of the plausible justifications for why men marry multiple wives. Now, if you're interested in what those justifications are, do refer to the first part of the polygamy episode. Now here we're going to be highlighting some of the main issues and challenges that come with the practice before I put forward my personal recommendations. Let's get straight into it. Now, obviously, this culturally prevailing practice doesn't come with its own set of problems. Back in 2017, the Emir of Nigeria's Kano state, Sanusi II, was reported to have said that polygyny had resulted in a lot of men fathering more children than they could shelter and care for. He stated that their unfortunate circumstances made them easy targets for terrorist recruiters. So we basically see that there is the potential issue of the practice being abused by men. Now, another interrelated issue is the emotional distress that the wife, or rather the wives of polygynous men, go through. And we know that traditionally a man does not need the approval or permission of his wife when deciding to take up another wife. And what this often does is it leaves the wives, i.e. the mothers of kids and the kids as well, feeling betrayed by their father, which could very easily grow into a deep resentment and create a permanent mark of hostility between all the involved parties. Based on these facts, it would be very, very, very difficult for one to argue that polygyny has no downsides. How could one? The woman feels betrayed. The man's got to divide his time between the two families so the kids don't get to see their father as much as they would hope to. So clearly, this ain't the ideal family structure, which I hope we could all agree would comprise of a father, a mother, and a bunch of kids. But unfortunately, we don't live in an ideal world. We live in a world where females outlive their male counterparts in every single country. A world where sex has become a cheap commodity, where having kids is viewed negatively, where the sanctity of marriage is fading because partners are only loyal to one another if it suits their convenience. Contrary to popular belief, these, among other reasons, have resulted in a decline of the human population. Now, based on this reality, what do we do? What can we do? Do we simply put our hands together and pray for things to change for the better? Do we continue publicly shaming and shunning individuals that engage in such marriage arrangements? Do we tell the segment of women in our societies that either never got to experience that marital companionship, or those that previously had it but no longer do for one of many reasons, that they should just suck it up and play with the cards they were dealt? Or do we consider a proposition that not only preserves marriage for the most part, but potentially increases it in societies that might be willing to revisit the practice? The realities in our societies should not be looked at from the lens of neo-Western film and tradition. Traditions that equate having a second wife with having a mistress. Those that equate the reinstating of women with lower chances of finding husbands, whether due to infertility, advancement in age, divorce, or widowhood, with the oppression of women. I've made it clear that polygyny is not the ideal family structure, but it may just be described as the least of all evils, or the least favorable yet most sound proposition to conjoin new family ties while maintaining respect, dignity, and honor in the existing ones. I understand that it comes at the cost of great emotional distress to the earlier wife and kids, which is most definitely a fundamental concern. But here we have a man who is financially, physically, and mentally capable and willing to take up responsibility of another family. Or you might ask, why does he need to marry her? Why can't he just sponsor the family on a consistent basis? Well, amongst other reasons, I guess the simple answer is that he'd be more involved in the decision making in his capacity as a husband or a family person relative to his position as a sponsor. Oh, so Superman is gonna marry every woman that he can financially take care of? No, just one or two. Moreover, the union that is formed through marriage is far stronger than that which is formed through creating, say, a charitable trust, since the former has more financial, legal, and cultural consequences. Entitlement to family heritage, maintenance, inheritance, etc., etc. I'm gonna cut this short. Let's say, right, hypothetically, you see some merit, right, just a little bit of merit in the practice of polygyny. Let's say you believe it makes sense under certain circumstances. But of course, you have your reservations because obviously the practice can still be abused by men. It leaves the wives and children in a state of distress. What then, Sana? What's the point you're trying to get to? Well, I 100% agree with you. And because I do, I believe there should be some checks and balances put in place. I believe there are two measures that could and should be adopted. Firstly, the upholding of a moral code. We have men invoking religion and culture as their basis for polygyny. Well, on those same grounds, they need to be reminded and called to account by their respective community leaders, who are hopefully more responsible than they are, to uphold the fundamental values of marriages. Because you do got some brothers out here that are petty as brothers marrying for the wrong reasons. So yes, married men, and even more so, polygynous men, must be societally accountable for possible transgressions and oppressions. In other words, it must be a societal project. Now, obviously, not everyone is going to be invested in the societal project, so there's got to be an extra layer of protection. Don't worry, I got you. That's when the second measure comes in, the legal code. Yes, in order to ensure the smoothness of project polygyny, I believe that there are a number of legal restrictions and requirements that must be established. Now, I spy with my exhausted eyes 3 things. Firstly, there must be proof of financial, mental, and physical capacity. The financial aspect would be through looking at the nature of his job, the bank statement. Now the mental aspect, well, I guess he's presumed to have good mental health, unless it can be shown, of course, that he's had breakdowns or episodes in the past, in which case I think it's best you stick with numero uno. And lastly, the physical aspect, I guess a medical report, yeah. Now secondly, assuming my man meets the above criteria, it has to be the case that the law imposes a limitation on the number of wives one man could and should marry. Because remember, while we're trying to challenge the status quo, we do want to maintain social cohesion. So we're not going to have a situation where one man is running from one house to another house. Like, it don't work like that when you love somebody. Now last but not least, if I haven't already lost both sides of the crowd, this would definitely finish it off. I believe that a man intending to remarry should tell his wife what he's about to do. I'm done. Yeah, I said it. Yeah, I get it. How do you even bring up a topic like that with your wife? Oh, you look formidable. So honey, yesterday I was at the supermarket, yeah, and so mon chéri, you know we're all gonna die one day, right? No, but really, a man's wife has the right to know that her husband intends to remarry. Now, obviously, most women are not going to even entertain that conversation. But hey, man's gotta be bold and firm enough to sit his wife down and tell her the truth. And if he can't do that, then that perhaps is proof that he lacks the mental capacity to handle this lofty undertaking. Just think about it, my G. You know there are bound to be conflicts between these two families that you're trying to pull together. So when you tend to break the news to your wife and kid, on your deathbed? Oh, you go tell her, my brother. This one, you go tell her this one. And look, I know that this ain't a comprehensive framework to govern the practice of polygyny. All I'm saying is that a legislation is much needed, and these are some of the items that should be tabled during the discussion. I didn't come up with this proposition. In 2017, Sanusi II, who as we mentioned earlier was the Emir of Nigeria's Kano state, had called for such a legislation. Now, I don't think it has since passed, but I believe it was a step in the right direction. Now, as a final remark, I just want to say that the problem with this whole charade is that we're not having a mature and civilized conversation about it. On one end, you got the ultra-polygynists claiming that anybody who disagrees with polygyny is not a true African. And on the other end, you got those that believe the practice should be outlawed in its entirety. Maybe because of past experiences. Maybe because we differ in our outlook of marriage. While some might perceive it as a relationship solely between two individuals, others might look at it as a unifying force between families, on the basis of building family ties, forming allegiances, establishing companionship, instilling dignity, and other elements that don't necessarily exist contemporaneously at all stages of the marriage. So no, polygyny does not resolve all societal issues, but it does help mitigate the infidelity pandemic in most of our societies that is partially, but heavily, due to the media's over-sexualization of women, which is a different topic altogether. But know that you cannot expect fresh fruits to come out of a tree with rotten roots. Ooh, that was deep. And while there are mixed opinions in society about the practice, we have to admit that there are legitimate grounds for a man to take more than one wife. And so as opposed to wholly condemning and denying the practice, maybe it's best we focus on ways to effectively govern the practice so that it achieves its intended goals. Can it achieve its intended goals? What are some of the other pertinent things that should be included in the legislation? I'm gonna leave that to you. While you're figuring that out, always remember. Adibeng.